Ken Burns, thank you for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Great to be with you.
So, everyone thinks they know a pretty cut and dry story about the American Revolution, but as you said earlier, it's complicated.
It is complicated, and I think that's the problem. We know a cut and dried version. We know sort of whatever we got in third grade, or was it fifth grade, or eighth, or maybe 11th, and was this true? Was that true? Was that made up in the 19th century? And so this is a dramatic story of our origin, where we came into being, the greatest country on earth, all of the extraordinary aspirations, and the nitty-gritty of the fighting. This is a bloody, bloody civil war. It isn't just an argument between Englishmen. There are Americans here who are fighting against the Patriot movement, the Loyalists. There are British soldiers they have hired because the British Army is decimated by all the wars they've fought. German soldiers, they're native peoples that are allying with the British or with us. They're enslaved or free black Americans who are allied with us or the British. There are women involved at every level. It is a dramatically long war. It begins in Lexington, Massachusetts on April 19th, 1775, and it doesn't end until October of 1781 in Yorktown, Virginia. And it touches every single state from Georgia to New Hampshire. And it's about as, I won't work on a more important film.
You'd said before we were talking that the American Revolution is perhaps the most important, perhaps next to the birth of Christ, event in human history. Do you think?
Yeah,
Why is that?
I came to that just out of a sense of how important setting this experiment has been in world history, and the idea that everybody before this had been a subject, and now there were citizens, and that the highest office of the land was in fact kind of citizens. And Washington understood it. It's why he resigned his military commission, and more importantly, why he resigned the presidency. So something happens. The Old Testament, Ecclesiastes, says there's nothing new under the sun, which means that human nature doesn't change, and it doesn't. But something happened that was really new under the sun. Thomas Paine says, not since the time of Noah do we have a chance to sort of reset and get it right. So you have this sense that there's big stuff happening in these 13 British colonies that are rebelling about native land and taxes and representation, that suddenly breaks out into huge natural rights that says all men are created equal. And while Jefferson meant all white men of property free of debt, it's not what we meant. The conservative scholar Yuval Levin says, once you say the word all, it's all over. It's just because that all means all. And then people are going to constantly expand it. And the story of the American project has been the expansion of that, what for Jefferson was fairly narrow understanding of that phrase, and what for half the population, more than half the population, women, means a lot more.
And so something else that hasn't changed that we like to think is unique to today is that we're at each other's throats, so we can't agree on anything.
Well,
this has always been a part of our story.
It's always been a part of our story. I mean, history has a way of knowing history, which people find boring, and I don't understand why. It's mostly made up of the word story plus high, and that's a great way to begin a story. It's what we all are addicted to, what we all digest story after story. The story, the history of the United States is so fascinating, and I think it can help us give a perspective. We are divided, but we've always been divided. It's the Civil War that was our revolution. Americans killing other Americans, the Loyalists killing the Patriots, and the Patriots killing the Loyalists, and the disaffected people who wanted to have nothing to do with the fight, keep their head down, are also probably doubly afflicted. There's lots of stuff, dramas going on. It reminds me in some ways like Yellowstone. There's so many layers of the story that it isn't just about George Washington, Kevin Costner, and the Dutton family at their ranch, but there are all these different levels, and when you get to know them, it's as dramatic and as compelling a story as you could possibly come. And of course, what the story ends up doing is setting in motion and creating the United States of America, which is one hell of a great experiment.
And it really doesn't happen without Washington.
You know what, the funny thing, we're in an age where the right and the left are happy to dispose of somebody. Somebody is canceled for some indiscretion of some sort of another, and everybody claims, oh, it's the other side that does it, but everybody does it. You can't cancel George Washington. He's central to it. Without him, we don't have a country. Is he flawed? Yes, but we've gotten in our media culture today to expect that heroes are perfect. Heroes have never been perfect. We borrowed it from the Greeks, who understood that heroism was a negotiation between the strengths and weaknesses of a person, sometimes a war between those strengths. Achilles had his heel and his hubris to go along with his great strength. And so you just call balls and strikes if you're telling history, and what emerges from calling balls and strikes is that, to continue the baseball metaphor, this is the George Washington, is the Babe Ruth of this story. We don't have a country without him. He is central to how we are there. And this is this unknowable, courtly, tall, doesn't give you much, doesn't let anybody into his inner space man who's able to inspire people in the dead of night to fight, who's able to stop a retreat by his mere presence, risking his own life several times in battle. He's somebody who picks extraordinary subordinate talent and trusts them to do a good job. He's able to negotiate with Congress, and more important, he's already envisioned the Union. He's understood that he can talk to Georgians and people from New Hampshire and make them understand that, yes, you call your colonies, now states, your country, but actually you're Americans. You're all this new thing that we're creating here. And it's spectacular. And then he makes bad battlefield decisions at the biggest battle of the Revolution at Long Island, and later at Brandywine in Pennsylvania, exposing, leaving exposed both first his left and then his right flank. And so that's like any one of us, not perfect, but without him we don't have a country, period, full stop.
And you said before that it's a wonderful thing that John Adams and Abigail Adams
are
apart, because you find so many wonderful correspondence between them that really...
It may be the greatest correspondence in American history. A lot of people like to say it's the correspondence between Jefferson and Adams that takes place. They were first friends, and they were enemies, and then they became friends again. And they both died exactly 50 years to the day, July 4th, 1826, 50 years to the day of the signing of the Declaration. And they could look back on that, and it is a really important correspondence. But there's something really wonderful and both immediate to ordinary life. He describes how Philadelphia is laid out, with this kind of enthusiasm. And it's between the Delaware River and the Schuylkill, and it's first and second and third and fourth. Some people don't like it, I do. And then they're named after fruit trees. And if you have Paul Giamatti reading it, who's been John Adams
right.
before, it's great. And Claire Danes in this case, not Laura Linney, who reads other voices in our film, but Claire Danes is Abigail, and she's saying, remember the ladies, all men would be tyrants if they would, and if you don't recognize the ladies in these deliberations, we're likely to foment a rebellion if we don't have representation. It's just wonderful correspondence between them, not just between Boston and Philadelphia, but later when he's posted to France, so and in other travels in Europe. It's just wonderful. And to have these come alive, not just the top-down folks whose names we've heard of, but all these people, scores of people I had never heard of before that we introduce you in the film, like a 14-year-old fifer from Boston named John Greenwood, 14 years old, joins the Patriot cause. Down in Connecticut, Joseph Plum Martin, 15 years old, signs up a couple days after the Declaration of Independence and fights throughout the war. I mean, that's who wins the war for Washington, are these teenagers and ne'er-do-wells and second and third sons without the chance of an inheritance, and recent immigrants from England and Scotland and Wales and Germany and Ireland. It's a phenomenal story that all of the mythology that's grown up around it and obscured the real view, when you scrape it away, it doesn't diminish it. It makes it bigger and better and more inspirational. I mean, I feel like this is a very patriotic film for all the complexity in it. It's a very, very patriotic film that we've done, and necessarily so, because the story is so extraordinary.
Well, and when the war was won, the British didn't leave.
No.
They were here in New York in fact, we celebrated Evacuation Day.
Yes.
For a very long time here in New York.
So, Evacuation Day happens November 25th, 1883. So, Yorktown is mid-October 1781. So that's 2 years and a month plus that they're still in control of a gigantic city in the United States.
Yeah.
And they've been in control since September 15th, 1776, when Washington has to abandon it. He's lost the Battle of Long Island, and he's left some troops there. He's racing up to Harlem and then to White Plains to try to avoid it, and then orders the rest of his army to evacuate. And without firing a shot, the British walk into New York City, the lower tip of Manhattan. And from September 15, 1776 until November 25th, 1783, it is British owned. That's 7+ years of New York City being the center of British power in the United States during the Revolution, which has begun only less than a year and a half earlier in Lexington, Massachusetts. It's hard for Americans to get your head around it, but when you do, then you understand what it's like, what it must have been like for Washington to come down to Bowling Green on Broadway and celebrate at Fonce's Tavern and say goodbye to his officers and go to Annapolis and resign his military commission, something nobody does, and then later on comes out of retirement to be the president of the Constitutional Convention, and then is elected unanimously president, and then leaves voluntarily from office, which nobody does, and sets an example for our democratic system.
So 250 years on, next summer, how do you think we're doing?
You know what? I think that we're doing okay. Fits and starts. We're in a big crisis right now. I think it's really important, and people feel that both sides of the aisle. But also, I think people who are less engaged in politics sort of feel the fraying of the tapestry. But I always think that when an individual's in distress, either they go to their pastor or they go to a professional who says, where'd you come from? Who are your parents? Tell me about your upbringing. And then somehow the rebuilding of the narrative helps. And so I think for us collectively to go back and understand our collective origin story is really, really important. And maybe this film contributes, as I think a lot of the celebration will do, to putting the us back in the U.S.
Ken Burns, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.